we are unpacking a fascinating trillion-dollar mystery. We're diving into the staggering dual reality of a generation that wields massive global economic power, yet behind the scenes, quietly harbors deep, persistent financial terror. We are, of course, talking about Generation X and the wealth secrets they learned the hard way.
Okay, so get this. $15.2 trillion. That is the jaw-dropping annual global spending power of Generation X right now. To put that completely into perspective for you, that single generation makes up a consumer market larger than the entire country of China. They are literally the quiet engine driving our global economy.
But you gotta ask, where is all that money actually going? Well, market researchers literally call Gen X the CFOs of 3 generations. And honestly, you really have to feel for them here. This title recognizes the massive burden they carry. They aren't just spending this immense wealth on themselves. No, they are heavily funding the lives of their adult or college-age kids and simultaneously stepping in to manage or entirely pay for the care of their aging parents. They are carrying everyone.
And it gets wilder. Notice the incredibly cold corporate language used by consumer research firms like NIQ here. Industries realize they only have a brief window left to capture this wealth. They're actively targeting Gen X's stress, their desperate desire for wellness, and their coping habits just to extract as much wealth as possible before this generation officially heads into retirement.
But here is where we hit a really shocking contradiction. Despite this immense $15.2 trillion cash flow, the data shows that 35% of Gen Xers cannot afford a $400 emergency expense without going into debt. That's higher than literally any other generation. It leads us to a massive question. How on earth can the world's biggest spending engine also be its most financially stressed?
Section 1. An era of wealth scarring. To understand the absolute panic lurking behind all that purchasing power, we have to look back at the economic battlefield this specific generation was forced to navigate. It really all comes down to a concept called wealth scarring. We're talking about the systemic financial trauma that Gen X endured right during their prime wealth-building years. These weren't just temporary blips in the market. These were massive disruptions that completely and permanently reshaped how this generation views job security, money, and quite frankly, survival.
Think about what they lived through. First, in the 1990s, they were the very first full generation to lose guaranteed company pensions, completely shouldering the risk of the brand new 401k system. Then, boom, the 2001 dot-com crash introduced sudden, brutal corporate layoffs. In 2008, the Great Recession wiped out their newly built home equity and completely battered their portfolios. And now, well, in the 2020s, they're getting squeezed by modern inflation and skyrocketing elder care costs all at once.
And the squeeze doesn't stop there. The median 401k balance for Gen X right now is only about $151,000. That covers barely 15% of what they're actually going to need in retirement. Add in stagnant wage growth, fears of displacement by AI and younger, cheaper labor, plus intense caregiver burnout. Yeah, you can quickly see why a generation earning so much feels like they're just one single crisis away from absolute ruin.
Section 2. Scars turned into strategy.
But here is the silver lining. This exact trauma birthed some incredibly potent survival tactics. Let's compare 3 personas here. We've got Ken, a Gen Xer, Maya, a millennial, and Zoe from Gen Z. Now, they all earn comparable incomes for their respective career stages. But look at Ken. He has a massive wealth gap. And this gap isn't because he has some wildly superior job. It's driven entirely by 4 specific money moves born directly from his wealth scarring. Let's break them down.
Move number 1 is the completely unsexy, utterly boring, but highly effective emergency fund. We call this the invisible buffer. Gen X actually has the highest rate of cash adequacy for emergencies. So when Ken's car breaks down, he absorbs the $4,000 hit in cash without even blinking. But when the exact same thing happens to Maya, she puts it on a 24% APR credit card and actually has to pause her monthly investing just to pay it off.
And the results of that behavior over time are just staggering. Over a 15-year career of average everyday emergencies, Maya's lack of a cash buffer cost her roughly $35,000 to $45,000 in missed compound growth, simply because she keeps having to pause her investments. Ken's portfolio, protected by his cash buffer, it never flinches.
Okay, move 2 is splitting the raise. See, Ken watched his parents build a lavish lifestyle on a bigger income, only to lose it all when layoffs hit. So when Ken gets a $5,000 raise, he banks half of it immediately into investments, allowing only a small, strictly controlled lifestyle upgrade.
Maya and Zoe, on the other hand, upgrade their apartments and habits at the exact speed of their new income. They essentially bank nothing. Next up, let's talk about debt. Statistically, Gen X holds the most debt of any generation. But wait, Ken's debt is almost entirely a fixed-rate mortgage tied to a house, which is an appreciating asset. Maya and Zoe, they are bleeding massive cash flow through casual debt. You know, those high-interest car loans, rolling credit card balances, and buy-now-pay-later schemes tied to depreciating items like clothes and phones. It just eats away at their income. To put a number on it, Maya spends about $620 a month just servicing her non-asset debt. If she'd invested that $620 into the market instead, over 15 years, it could have grown to $250,000. Ken inherently understands that borrowing for things that go down in value is a catastrophic financial leak. He leverages debt for growth. Maya uses it for lifestyle. Move 4 is absolutely fascinating. It's the boring second income. Because they survived massive corporate layoffs, Gen X is absolutely terrified of having a single point of failure. Consequently, they hold the highest rate of secondary income streams. But as we'll see, they do it very, very differently and, frankly, much more profitably than younger generations. Think about the difference here. While Maya chases viral, expensive side hustles that often end up net negative, and Zoe runs a high-effort Instagram shop that nets maybe $50 a month, Ken quietly does boring B2B operations consulting on Sunday mornings. No website, no ring light, no aesthetic, just $800 a month. And he drops every single penny straight into an index fund, turning boring consistency into over $250,000 over 15 years.
Section 3. The cost of distrust. Now, to remain perfectly objective here, we do have to look at Ken's Achilles heel. Because as it turns out, the very trauma that created their greatest financial superpower also created their absolute biggest blind spot. Gen X watched the financial system and massive corporations totally fail their parents' pensions, right? So they deeply distrust financial advisors and platforms. Ken insists on a DIY approach, which leads him to a highly conservative 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio purely out of caution. For his age and timeline, standard financial models would recommend a much more aggressive 80-20 split.
And that DIY stubbornness and deep fear of market crashes, it comes with a hefty price tag. By underinvesting in equities when the market was climbing over the last decade and a half, Ken's extreme caution actually cost him up to $80,000 in left-on-the-table compound returns. His fear absolutely kept him safe, but it also held his wealth back.
Section 4. Owning the financial future.
But listen, even with that blind spot, the overall math of these habits is completely undeniable. When you stack these 4 moves over a 15 to 20-year career timeline, Ken generates a staggering $400,000 to $500,000 net worth advantage over Maya. And again, this is not from having a substantially better job or inheriting a bunch of money. It comes purely from a behavioral wealth gap. It's all about how he rigorously treated the money he already had. So let's recap those 4 steps. 1. Build the invisible cash buffer. 2. Split every raise in half. 3. Kill casual, non-asset debt. And 4. Start a boring, low-cost side income. These 4 strategies aren't flashy. They definitely won't make you viral on social media. In fact, they demand that you look a little less successful today so you can actually be deeply, foundationally successful tomorrow.
So I'll leave you with this final thought as we wrap up today's explainer. Your money habits are rarely accidental. They are either passively borrowed from the generation that raised you, or they're consciously chosen by the person you are becoming. The playbook is right in front of you. Which will you choose?